This is the second video on genes and alleles, and it was going to cover the more complex inheritance patterns that are not just simple dominance. I want to start with a bit of review. Remember that genes found on DNA are really just directions for making proteins. And it's these proteins that then produce a particular trait in an organism that we can see. Any offspring that are produced by sexual reproductions are going to have two alleles of most genes, one from each parent, and those two alleles make up what we call the genotype. Those alleles work together to produce something that we can observe as a trait, and that observable trait is the phenotype. And these two alleles can also interact in a variety of ways, and I want to talk about these ways in a little more detail in this video. So we've talked about simple dominance in the first video. Another word for simple dominance is complete dominance because one allele completely dominates the other. The phenotype, whatever particular version of the trait that is determined by the dominant allele, is present as long as you have just one copy of that allele. But the phenotype of the recessive allele is present only when there are two copies that have been inherited. The fact that you have the phenotype of a red flower can be found when you have a homozygous dominant genotype. Both alleles are the dominant allele, and a heterozygous genotype, because this dominant allele overrides whatever information is coming from the recessive one. In order to get our recessive trait, our white flower, you have to have two copies of the recessive allele. But simple dominance is only one way that alleles can interact. Another way is called incomplete dominance. And again, we're starting with two alleles, but neither one really truly dominates the other. When you have a heterozygous genotype, it actually will create a new type of phenotype that's really just a blending of the expression of the two alleles. So we see this in certain flowers where the flower color, when you have a red flower crossing with a white flower, and both of those are homozygous, one homozygous with the dominant and one homozygous with the recessive, the result is a blending of white and red to make pink. So the heterozygous genotype is making a blended phenotype. In this case, red and white are blending together to make pink, just like you would have happen in your paint. The same thing can happen with rabbits, breeding rabbits of different length fur. A long fur parent and a short fur parent will make a medium fur offspring. So it is a blending of the two to get something that's halfway between the two parents. We can use Punnett squares to predict the probability of certain phenotypes for incomplete dominance. Just remember that the heterozygous will be that incomplete blended form, whereas you need to have homozygous to get either one of the pure characteristics. So here again is just showing you with the Punnett square. We have our cross between a red and a white to give us a pink flower. And then if you took two pink flowers and crossed them, looking at your Punnett square, we would have 25% that have a chance of getting a homozygous dominant with the two alleles. They would have red flowers. We have 25% that would be homozygous recessive, giving us white flowers, and then 50% of the heterozygous form producing pink flowers. So just interpreting the Punnett squares from an incomplete dominance perspective instead of a complete dominance or simple dominance where you would expect to have 3 out of the 4 to be red. With incomplete dominance, only 1 comes up red and 2 are going to be that blended pink color. Another way alleles can interact is codominance. And again, we're talking about how two alleles interact. In this case, neither one is dominant over the other. The genotype, the heterozygous genotype creates a new phenotype that shows both traits. So in flower color, instead of getting pink from red and white, you see both red and white colors present on the flower. In animal fur color, if you blend again gray or a black and a white animal, instead of getting an overall gray, if you look at the individual hairs, some may be white or some may be black, or there may be white spots, and black spots on the body. And again, the probability of different phenotypes can be predicted using a Punnett square for codominance as well. Here are just two pictures of what codominance could look like. So again, one parent would be a red flower, the other parent a white flower. The offspring has both red and white, each of them kind of taking up their own space on the flower. And then this would be an example of a brown and a white coated parents putting together an offspring that has both of those hair colors present on the body, giving this sort of red roan appearance. Another way alleles can interact is when you have multiple alleles, more than two alleles, or even more than two genes contribute to a particular phenotype. And within those multiple alleles, any combination of two of them might have a simple dominant, or an incomplete dominance, or a codominance relationship. So we have human blood types is a perfect example of that. We have 3 alleles for our most common blood types, and there are 4 possible phenotypes. You can have type A blood, type B blood, type AB blood, and type O blood. In this situation, A and B are dominant over O, but A and B are codominant together. Human skin color is another trait that's controlled by multiple genes, certainly tens of genes, if not hundreds of genes. And so the prediction of the probability of a phenotype when it comes to something as complicated as skin color is quite difficult. Blood type is not that bad, but some of the other multiple allele traits, it's really not possible to use a Punnett square to make a prediction. This chart is just showing you how the different alleles in blood type work. So A and B are dominant over O, so you can have a homozygous dominant genotype to give you a type A phenotype. You can have this heterozygous A with an O allele, again would give you an A phenotype. The same thing is true for your B blood type, but A and B together is going to give you that codominant AB blood type, and 2 O alleles is the only way you're going to get an O because O is the recessive. Most animals have specific chromosomes that determine biological sex, and in most cases, one sex has a homozygous set of sex chromosomes, and the other one is heterozygous. So in mammals, biological females are generally XX, and biological males are XY. Sometimes you get multiple copies of those, so like an XYY or a single X, but in general, the females are the homozygous, the male are the heterozygous. If there is a recessive allele that is found on the X chromosome, it will appear in males when only one copy is inherited because there is only one X present in that heterozygous genotype. And so those traits are known as sex-linked, and if that recessive phenotype happens to be a undesirable phenotype, a potential disease, it will appear more often than in males. So color vision is not something that is really a disease, but it certainly is an inconvenience, and it is found on the X chromosome in humans. So a woman who has normal vision, but is a carrier for the defective allele that causes color blindness, can pass this on to her children. Some of her children will receive the normal X, other ones will receive the defective X, depending upon how these 2 chromosomes sort when gametes are made. Her husband, the father of the children, has normal vision because his 1X chromosome has already the normal allele for normal vision, and the Y chromosome does not have any gene for vision. So there are several ways the offspring, these chromosomes, could sort out. We could have a female with normal vision having inherited the good allele from both parents. You could have a female with normal vision who has inherited one good X chromosome and one that is carrying the defective allele. You can have a male that, again, has normal vision because he inherited a good gene from the mother and, of course, the Y chromosome coming from the father. And then finally, a male who is colorblind because he received the X chromosome from his mother that carried that defective allele, and there's no other X chromosome to cover that up. By itself, that allele is recessive, but it's going to express itself because there's no dominant gene there to hide it. Finally, I want to talk a bit about epigenetics, because the way the gene expresses its particular trait can be influenced by environmental factors. For example, if you are in a famine situation as a child, your height potential, the genes for how tall you could potentially become, will be restricted by the amount of food you had to eat in this famine situation, and so then you may never be as tall as you could have been. So environmental factors such as the food available and the activity required of you, in some situations gender, have you been exposed to any poisons in the environment, how is the stress level or the amount of sleep you're getting, or your overall mental health, can all affect how genes are expressed. And these epigenetic factors can either turn on a particular gene, encourage the proteins being made from that gene, or even turn them off. So that we are, learning more and more about how things outside of our own genome, outside of our genes and our DNA, can actually affect how that DNA, those traits, are being expressed in our bodies. Some of these we can't do anything about, but other ones, there are choices that we can make and lifestyle decisions that can improve your chances so that you get the right genes turned on and perhaps the ones you don't want turned off. So to summarize, there are various ways that alleles can interact. In simple, otherwise known as complete dominance, you only need one copy of that dominant allele to see that particular trait. In incomplete dominance, a heterozygous genotype is going to produce a phenotype that is a blend of the traits of the two alleles. In codominance, the heterozygous genotype is going to produce a phenotype that actually shows both characteristics from each allele. If you have a situation with multiple alleles, that means there are more than two alleles contributing to a particular phenotype. And in sex-linked traits, the heterozygous sex, whether that be male or female, depending upon the animal, that heterozygous sex will be more affected by any negative genes that are sitting in those sex chromosomes. And finally, environmental factors, which we call epigenetic factors outside of the genetic code, can influence gene expression in ways that we are learning more and more about. So this completes the second video talking about genes and alleles and how they can interact.